I'm broadcasting now. The ACA Small Business Boot Camp and Resource Collective. As we get started, I want to first thank our community partners and all the support that they've given us throughout the past many weeks of the boot camp, and for the content they've also provided have been very valuable. As a reminder, the Boot Camp and Resource Collective is designed to help small businesses as we emerge from the COVID crisis and work through the COVID crisis. And it's a statewide initiative supported by our community partners, those listed on the previous slide, and many others. It's a daily boot camp, and we're going to continue it. It's been going on through all of May and throughout June so far, and we're going to continue till the end of June, and even possibly beyond that with quality content to help small businesses grow. So this week's topics, we've had building a business plan to return stronger, rebuilding consumer confidence, how COVID-19 can affect your contract. Today is our final safety in the workplace session with the National Safety Council. And then tomorrow we will have our marketing session on how to announce your business has reopened. Looking forward to that session. So some quick updates with the PPP. As of yesterday evening, we're still sitting at well over 100 billion in the PPP funds. The biggest news we want to touch on is at the bottom point. And I included the link if we'll put that in the chat box here in a little bit. But the SBA has posted new interim final rulings, IFRs is referred to, on the PPP Flexibility Act. That's the act that was signed last weekend by the president with the adjustments and the amount that needs to be spent on payroll for forgiveness and the time frame that the loans have to be spent, along with a number of other things. With that in mind, we are having another PPP session on Monday, June 15th, so this coming Monday, on the boot camp, and we're going to dive into that Flexibility Act and the updates and how they change and how it impacts your forgiveness application. So stay tuned and tune in for that. Just a reminder, the ACA has lots of programs to help your small business, whether it's working with the SBA or the SBDC, local banks, working with our workforce team to help with your employees, either find employees or crosswalk employees. And then our Arizona Manufacturing Extension Partnership team can help your manufacturing operation and help it grow. So check out those programs that we have. You can find them on our website. Additionally, I want to mention the Arizona Together website, which is the state's COVID-19 resource and information location. And our resource guides that we put together. These are guides from various different organizations to help your business return to work and be strong and follow the different guidelines for COVID-19. Whether you're a hair salon, restaurant, retail outlet, there's safety recommendations for the construction industry. A lot of great information on here. Quick mention of our website, the azcommerce.com/COVID-19, resource for all your Arizona business resources in the pandemic. So today, speakers, we have Ed Tobby from the National Safety Council, we also have Amber. I don't know if Amber's gonna be with us today, but she's been instrumental in helping with these sessions and bringing quality content, safety related to the boot camp. So we appreciate all of her help as well. So with that in mind, we're gonna turn the time over to Ed and let him share his information today.
Awesome, very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Can everybody see my screen? Oh, there it is. Good morning. My name is Ed Tobby. I am with the Arizona chapter of the National Safety Council here in Phoenix. And we are an organization, we're a nonprofit nationwide organization dedicated to safety at home, the workplace, on the roadways, and at play. And as we mentioned, my name is Ed Tobby. I'm one of the trainers here. Yes.
We can't see your screen. You might need to start your video.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me find, I don't have a toolbar. Hang on a second here. So if I start video, you'll see me. Let me see if I can do the
And then
screen
you can
share
share your,
option.
yeah,
There we go.
let's see.
All right. How's that?
Now we got it.
All right. Excellent. Sorry for the technical glitch there, but we're good. Should be good to go. All right. As I mentioned, I'm one of the trainers here at the Arizona Chapter National Safety Council. My specialties are first aid, CPR, defensive driving courses, lift truck, construction zone flagger, and various advanced safety certificate courses, such as safety training methods, safety management techniques, incident investigation, ergonomics, team safety, job safety analysis. Typically, Amber joins us on these. She is the president of Safety Help Today, and she's also one of our trainers here. Amber has commitments on Thursday morning, which makes it hard for her to come to these, but she's participated some in the past, but she's also been very, very instrumental in developing the information and curriculum that we're sharing. So we certainly want to acknowledge Amber's contributions here. She does specialize in OSHA related training and compliance, and she assists companies in developing effective safety programs. So our goals of today's course is, and as we've been doing all along, trying to help businesses develop processes and procedures that will ensure safety as we reemerge and open in relation to the COVID virus and epidemic that has broken out. Obviously, the virus has changed the way we do a lot of different things. And so we have to be adaptable, and we have to be able to build confidence in our employees and build confidence in our customers that it is safe to return, and we're looking out for their best interests, we're looking out for their health, and we want to be able to communicate that message positively with both of those groups. And if we're going to continue to succeed as in business, it's really, really important that we have very effective communication. So much of today's content is based on a program that the National Safety Council instituted. They formed a task force right when the virus outbreak was identified, and they got a very large group of people from all around the country to participate in a task force to develop safe actions for employee returns. On the national level, the National Safety Council has been in existence since 1913, so we're about 107 years old. We're recognized as one of the leaders in the country in safety development, safety training, and assisting people all around the country to remain safe. Like I say, especially first aid, CPR, and roadway safety are real strong suits, but certainly workplace safety is a really, really important topic. I did put the link for the SAFER report, nsc.org/safer. That'll also be in our resource page at the end. But what the task force consisted of was small and large companies from around the country, people from nonprofits, legal experts, public health professionals, government agency representatives. And these are people that are really, really high level experts in the field of workplace safety, right? And a lot of these large companies already had some really, really effective best practices. And when they got this task force together, they were all willing to share what these practices were and then adapt those practices to address the complications that exist with the COVID virus. So it's a really large body of work that they've completed in a very short time. The quality is second to none. Much of what you're going to see in the presentation today has been pulled from that document and their work. So we're going to share some of that as we go along. The objectives of the SAFER committee was to help guide the reintroduction of employees back into the work environments. At some point, you know, the virus is going to start to decline and restrictions are going to be eased and businesses are starting back up. And that process has been taking place all across the country at various levels in different places. And certainly in Arizona, once the restrictions were eased a couple weeks ago, we were really focused on how do we get people back into the workforce and into the consumer side of things and build confidence knowing that they're going to be safe and healthy, right? And so that's what this is all about, health and safety and making sure that we can all move forward in a very safe way. They broke down into 6 basic categories. Physical environments, which is the buildings themselves. And we're going to go into each of these in a little bit more detail as we progress here. They obviously have to address medical and health concerns. Stress, emotional, and mental health has been a pretty significant topic, especially about the last 30 days or so. With the people having restrictions on where they could travel and the things they do, isolation and some stress, and with people especially furloughed from work, higher levels of unemployment, the emotional and mental health aspects have to be recognized. And if we're going to be successful, we need to make sure that we are accommodating those types of things that people are coming back to work with, right? Along those lines, we do have some employment, legal, and HR considerations we have to think about, especially when we start talking about testing and temperature taking and things like that. And all along through this whole process, it's really important to have effective communication. And there are also external factors that we cannot control. We cannot control certain behaviors of the virus. We cannot control changing levels of standards that may have to take place in order to address this, right? So you as business owners, you have the things that you're really good at and are focusing on, but there's also a whole world of things beyond your control that may affect you and affect your businesses. So how do we get started in this whole process? Because it can be a bit overwhelming. So what we want to do is kind of break things down into steps and break those steps down further and focus on individual tasks. The first thing I would suggest is gather as much information as possible on topics that are going to address your specific type of business. And there's a lot of resources to do that. The SAFER website that I showed you a few minutes ago, OSHA, CDC, the governor's office, the state health department. There's a lot of really good information out there that you can use to gather information to help you kind of sort through what's important and prioritize what you need to do. It's going to be important to start with a clean facility. So if you've been closed for a little while, or if you've been open on a limited basis, it's important to kind of start fresh with a good, clean, sanitary facility. And when you do that, make sure everybody that comes into your facility is aware of what you've done. It can be helpful to assign not only a leader within your organization, but a committee or a task force, a group of people that are going to look at a broad perspective of their job functions and be able to provide feedback from their perspective on what they're seeing as potential safety or health hazards and ways to address those effectively. It's important for each of you to determine what is the exposure potential based on your specific type of business. Certainly a manufacturing facility is going to be different than a restaurant. It's going to be different from an office building or a hotel. So each of these business types has some unique aspects about it. And that's why it's important for you to not take just a blanket approach to everything, but to start to narrow down and look specifically at your exposures for your business, and then develop a preparedness plan and a disease prevention plan to help mitigate what those hazards would be. And it's also important as employees return to work, we keep them up to speed on what you've been doing. So have almost like a new hire orientation. We want a return to work orientation where you talk about, what have you done to clean the facility? What processes are you taking? What controls have you put into place? Your genuine concern for their health. And that's not only physical health, but mental health. And so when we're looking at exposure potentials and creating these plans and communicating the information, we want to look at what we call the 3 E's. That would be everything, everyone, and everywhere. And we want to look very thoroughly throughout our business on where those apply, and then solicit input from these teams, these members of the committees that are going to help you draft your plans and prepare your business. And so when we identify gaps in whatever our preparedness might be, then we start to work on what kind of controls that we can put into place. One great source is OSHA. And once again, I decided to put the OSHA link on this page really big because this is a tremendous starting point. They have standards, they have the latest updates, they have hazard recognition tips, medical information, and they have a lot of really specific guidelines for industries. And this is kind of a screenshot of their homepage. And when you look under, I know it's small and kind of hard to read, but when you look under that highlights tabs and the control and prevention tabs, there is a lot of very specific, healthcare, dentistry, public safety, meat and poultry processing, airlines. There's a lot of different topics there and categories of businesses that they've developed some specific plans that are going to help you as you start to move forward. So I would really suggest if you're not sure where to start, this is a really good place. And the NSC Safer website is also an excellent resource. So when we're talking about the types of controls that we put in place, we've done our hazard analysis and we've identified some things that we need to address. Now, what do we do in order to control our exposure to those hazards? And this is what's called the hierarchy of controls. This is an excellent tool. OSHA uses this very prominently, and it's kind of an upside down pyramid, as you can see. And the most effective controls are listed at the top levels. That would be elimination and substitution. And then we go into engineering, administrative controls, and PPE. Now, by elimination, you want to try to physically remove the hazard. In the case of a virus such as COVID, since you still have people present and the virus is not easily controlled because we don't have vaccines and effective treatments, elimination is probably not possible in this particular case. And we can't substitute this virus for a different virus that's less toxic. So substitution also kind of gets taken out of our choices when we're looking at controls that we can implement. So that takes us to the engineering controls level. And engineering controls are controls that isolate employees from the work hazards. And they don't rely on worker behavior in order to be effective. So engineering controls could be physical barriers. You're seeing that a lot in retail establishments where they have the plexiglass between the person and the cashier, for example. So those are examples of engineering controls. It could be, changing the airflow and increase circulation of the air. It could be a lot of different things that you build into your facility that isolate the workers from the hazard. The next level would be administrative controls. And when we can't engineer out the hazard, then we have to look at administrative. And this is in the form of education. This is in the form of signage. These are things that do rely on the behaviors of the people in order to be effective on these controls. And so we have to have safe work practices. We have programs for workers to report illness, to report things that they're concerned about. Have we given them the proper educational tools and training in order to do their job effectively and safely? Do we have effective travel policies? My son works for a company and he does things nationwide. And so they've made some really big changes to their travel policies and try to limit travel to only what they determine to be absolutely essential. And although those policies are starting to ease a bit, there's still a lot you can do on that side of things. Administrative controls also include your cleaning process, disinfecting, hygiene procedures, and as we also mentioned, signage. Now, PPE is the last line of defense. So you see on this pyramid, it is the least effective of all the controls. And the thing about PPE is if it fails, you end up with an exposure. And unfortunately, a lot of people think of PPE before they think of the other types of controls. They think, well, let's just put on a mask, put on the gloves, and we're good to go. But that's not always the most effective process. So we have to, the other thing about PPE is it's generally the least expensive of these options. So when we're looking at, a cost analysis of what it takes, that's another reason that a lot of places go directly to PPE, because it costs less to do it. And they believe it's effective based on what their analysis is. But just like I say, just remember that if PPE fails, then we do have an exposure. If we're looking at various face coverings, for example, and there's different levels. There's been a lot of news about availability of that type of mask. That's actually classified as a respirator by OSHA. And when you're using respirators, there are some standards that have to be complied with. They have to be fit tested. They have to be trained. Sometimes the people have to have physical examinations, because when you put a respirator that is going to somewhat restrict the airflow, and you put that on a person that already has maybe asthma and they're already struggling a little bit for air exchange, you could create additional hazards by implementing that type of control. So we do have to analyze the effects and the effectiveness of these various types of controls. And once again, the level of this PPE is going to be very dependent on your specific type of exposures and your type of training and planning and controls you implement. So the physical environments, these are your buildings, facilities, workplaces. Some categories we need to look at is one is the HVAC system. Have you changed the filters recently? Because if we're dealing with potential airborne pathogens, those are going to get trapped in those HVAC filters and possibly held there, and maybe even distributed throughout the facility when those break free. So it's a good idea to have the HVAC filters changed. Check your water system. If you've been away for a period of time and you're coming back, it might be prudent to flush those water systems out for a period of time if it hasn't been used for a while. Develop a cleaning and disinfecting schedule. And this is something, it's a really basic thing you can do, but you can say, hey, every hour we're going to clean this high touch surface, for example. And whether that's doorknobs, whether that's countertops, whether that's work surfaces, those types of things. But it's important to have a schedule in place so that it's not just a random event, because it's very difficult to track when you're just doing things randomly. Instead of saying, hey, make sure you keep that clean all day long. Well, no, every hour on the hour, we're going to do a wipe down or we're going to do a disinfection. Social distancing is something we've all, this is a term that we're all used to hearing now. If we're out at all in public, we're seeing a lot of signage, markings, guidance, visual cues on how to maintain this social distancing of 6 feet. So it's important, once again, when we get to your workspace, maybe you're a large office area and you have a lot of cubicles that are set in place, and it's going to be difficult to physically change the distancing on those cubicles. That's where you may have to use an engineering control such as some sort of barrier temporarily to put in between. So if you can't create the space, you use a different type of control. Communal food and drink, refrigerators, drinking fountains, water dispensers, different types of vending machines. Those can be high touch areas. So we have to look at those and determine if we're going to change how that type of service is provided, or once again have a scheduled maintenance so that those high touch surfaces are frequently disinfected. And if there's a way to create no touch entries, whether it's door sensors, towel dispensers, hand dryers, those kind of things, entries and exits that you can get on. And maybe there's some doors that you typically would keep closed within your building that now you can leave open for the time being. So look at those types of things. It's amazing how many times you open and close doors during the course of a day when you're in some of these facilities, right? So look at those things, and then limit gatherings. Whether it's meetings, whether it's break areas, lobbies, any place where people might tend to gather socially or to communicate their work. We're going to have to look at maybe some alternative ways to accomplish those things without having people physically close to each other. So as I mentioned earlier, it's important to conduct a risk or hazard analysis. This doesn't have to be a super complicated process. Just, take your job and break that job down to individual tasks. For example, a job would be an electrician. A task would be to change out a wall outlet, right? So yes, they're doing that as an electrician, but let's look at the steps to keep somebody safe to change out the wall outlet. Lock out, tag out on the breakers, making sure you've got all the proper tools, you've got proper PPE and all those different things, and break that down and identify what the potential hazards are, and then identify what the controls are to put into place to mitigate the exposure to those hazards. And once again, we're going to use engineering, administrative, and PPE controls in that order, and that's going to help us create the most effective hazard controls. So disease prevention and preparedness. Industrial hygiene is not a topic that a lot of people are familiar with, but it's really, really important that we look at this from an industrial hygiene standpoint. And it consists of 4 different categories: physical, biological, ergonomic, and chemical. And I've highlighted biological and chemical here because the virus is a biological hazard that we have to recognize and we have to try to minimize our exposure to. And sometimes to do that, we also have to introduce some various chemicals in the form of cleaners into our workplace. And these chemicals also can potentially have some hazards if the proper directions aren't followed, the proper precautions. Some of them require gloves, some of them require, respirators because there's some fumes involved. So we're going to focus on the biological and chemical hazards when we're doing our industrial hygiene analysis. And the process to do that is we anticipate what the hazards could be. We recognize that they are. We evaluate that hazard and try to determine what controls we put into place. And then we have to confirm whether those controls were effective. And this is kind of a constant cycle of repeating this process for different types of hazards we might identify in our workplace. Some really helpful standards that are related to industrial hygiene are the bloodborne pathogen standards. And the ones that are shown on the screen, those are the OSHA standards that apply to these. Personal protective equipment standards is also listed, and then respiratory protection. And when we're looking at respiratory protection, keep in mind, once again, that could trigger some additional processes needed to put into place to make sure that we're using those respiratory devices safely and not creating additional hazards. All right. Medical and health standpoint. This is a sample form that could be used, and some employers are using. And this applies to either their employees coming into the building. Sometimes they'll have their customers sign a form similar to this. When I go to my doctor, they have me sign a form very similar. They're also taking my temperatures. And it has a series of questions. And one of the things we have to, stay aware of is when we're asking people to provide medical information. If you're on the medical side of things, obviously HIPAA laws apply, but in general business, you have ADA and EEOC regulations that come into play here. And so on some of these, if you were to ask this, the question specifically by itself, they may or may not fit into those regulations. But if you ask a series of questions and ask them, can you answer affirmatively to all of these without identifying which one is the disqualifier, this is what helps make this type of questionnaire effective, and it meets the standards because we're not soliciting specific disability information from somebody. We're asking, a broad base series of information, and we're not identifying something specific. So we're going to see more of this type of form being used. Additional screening that could be put in place is actually taking temperature checks, specific COVID-19 testing, and if you have positive tests, then some additional contact tracing of who this person has been directly in contact with. Temperature checks are considered by ADA to be a medical exam, and there are some restrictions on the types of medical exams you're legally allowed to do as an employer. But since this COVID virus has been identified and that people testing positive for the virus can be considered a direct threat, that changes the rules somewhat on what we're allowed to do, but we still have to make sure that we're maintaining privacy when we're doing these things. So if you have, the gentleman in the picture getting his temperature check with the thermal scanner, if there's a line of people behind him and the person doing the scanning is announcing his temperature, then they're violating his privacy, right? So, and it can be something pretty simple like that. So we have to just be aware, if you're gonna do additional screenings, temperature checks, testing and tracing, that we look at the applicable standards and laws that apply to employee privacy, because we don't want to inadvertently violate some of them. And sometimes it's with the best intentions. Somebody will come to work and maybe they're a little bit older, and you say, hey, I'm a little bit concerned because this virus affects the elderly a little bit more seriously than others. And if you exclude somebody strictly based on their age, then we could run into some EEOC and some ADA issues there. So, and specifically with hygiene and infection control, practice safe behaviors, sneezing into a cloth or a tissue or your elbow, staying home if you feel ill, be aware of other people's symptoms, observe these things, avoid non-essential contact with others. We're all used to handshakes and high fives and sometimes hugs with others, especially family and friends. So we have to be aware of that contact. Avoid sharing equipment and objects. It's amazing how often, just at a restaurant, we have a pen that you hand from one person to the other, and that's an object that you're sharing that could be a point where we start to transmit the disease. So we just have to be a lot more aware of these types of things than we've been in the past. Infection protocol, and this has to do with various levels of exposure and the people that are in contact with them. So if the primary individual in this case would be somebody that has specifically been diagnosed with COVID-19. And so in the case of the primary individual, they should be quarantined for 14 days and can only return to work after receiving clearance from a physician and documented negative COVID-19 results. And that what we want to try to do in this case is identify other team members that have been in close contact with the individual. And that would mean being within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes at a time. And those people should be notified that they have been in contact with somebody who has tested positive. The area where they've been working should also either be shut down for 3 days for self-sanitizing, because we know the virus has a lifespan, and usually about 3 days is the upper limit of that, or we do a direct disinfecting and cleaning of that particular space. Somebody that may have symptoms or may have a direct exposure, but they're not yet positive tests, that would be like fall into the next category. So they've been in contact with somebody, or they have some symptoms. In this case, the protocol is to also quarantine them for 14 days and do some additional testing to ensure that they don't have the active virus. And then they would be cleared to return for duty once those negative tests occur. And in that case, we want to identify anybody that would be a secondary to them and notify them, and also clean the affected area very similar to what we would do with the primary. The secondary group, that's in contact with somebody in the group right above them, right in contact with the primary, but they are not the primary individual. So in this case, we're not quarantining, but we are asking them to monitor symptoms. If they exhibit, the fevers, the shortness of breath, some of the other symptoms that the CDC has identified, then they should act accordingly and self-quarantine, or maybe work from home until, because sometimes these symptoms could be something else and sometimes they're temporary. So sometimes it's hard to differentiate a symptom, a fever for the flu versus the fever for COVID or fever due to some sort of other infection. So just because you have a symptom doesn't mean you are positive, but that's where additional testing is to come into play. And then tertiary, these would be people that in a little bit further down the hierarchy of exposure. We just want to make sure that we notify them, and no action is required, but keep communication open and monitor any potential symptoms may have. Emotional and mental health. This is, like I say, an area that I've participated in a number of webinars that I've been on that talk about this topic. Because we do have higher rates of unemployment, because we have had some isolation, because we've had people that are taken out of their normal daily routine of going to work, now they're at home. Either they're alone, or they are lonely, or they're really restricted with the contact with other people. It can have an effect on everybody's mental status. So if you recognize people that are coming back to work and they look tired, they say, man, I'm just wrung out. I'm mentally done. They have difficulty making decisions, can't stay focused. They become frustrated and exhibit a bit more angry. Maybe they're going to argue more with you or your family or friends. Like I say, fatigue, sadness, loneliness, worries, and changes in appetite or sleep patterns. And sleep patterns are really critical because they affect all of these things, right? So the point here is, as business owners, be more aware and sensitive to these types of things. Have a process in place to have private discussions with the people that are exhibiting the symptoms. Have a plan in place for how to, what to do. Do we refer them for some sort of additional counseling? Do we change their job description a bit and simplify things, or refocus them on different things? So let's just make sure that we are addressing the mental and emotional health side of things, because your employees are your greatest asset. And your customers are a huge asset. And when they are disrupted by something like this that can affect not only their physical health, but their mental health, it's a big factor that we have to be aware of. Let's talk a little bit about some of the employment, legal, and HR. And our intent here is not to dig deep here, because this could be an all-day topic just in itself. But we do have to think about some of the things that come up as a result of how we're addressing the virus. But on a big picture level, on a supervisor leadership level, stay positive, have compassion for what your employees have experienced and what they're currently going through. There's some big changes. Maybe they come back to work and their work process is totally different than it was, and that makes them uncomfortable. So be supportive, offer training, offer additional counseling, whatever it is. Be transparent about what you're doing, because people's stress levels go up because they're concerned with the unknown. So the more you can communicate with them, hey, here's what we've done, here's how we're making sure that things are as safe as they possibly be. I care about you as a human being. I want to know if you have any concerns, and open that dialogue. And it should be a two-way communication. Lead by example. If you specify face coverings in your workplace and you're walking around without one, you're going to lose a lot of credibility very, very quickly. So, if you are the champion of this and the leader of this safety initiative, you have to lead by example and, do the things you say you want them to do. And then you have to also be aware of some of the regulations. If you do implement masks, know what the OSHA testing and fitting policies are having to do with masks. Identify the level of that mask to match your level of exposure. So these regulations, as we mentioned earlier, when we're doing medical testing, when we're doing screening, when we have questionnaires that's soliciting information from people that would normally be private, that's where the EEOC and ADA regulations come in. So research those and see what questions you're allowed to ask and which ones you're not. For example, you can't ask somebody, hey, anybody in your family have COVID? You can ask it on a more general level, have you been exposed to anybody that's tested positive with COVID? And that doesn't identify anybody specific. That's more of a broad reaching statement. But it's a subtle difference, but it's a difference that's going to make decide whether or not you're following these guidelines and maintaining the proper level of privacy, and that we're not identifying some things that are covered under the ADA, right? Some sort of disability a person may have, because just because they have a disability doesn't mean you can exclude them. The laws say you have to accommodate for those various disabilities. Employee resources, look at your personal time off and flexible work policies. A lot of businesses had people working from home. Many still have people working from home. And so working from home can have its own set of potential hazards as well. And so, have communication about that. Make sure that they have a healthy work environment from wherever it is they are, and communicate if we need to furlough you, if we need to have, like here at the Safety Council, there was a period of time where we were only here every other day. And so that day that we were home, some people had the capability of working remotely, where there were some jobs that they just couldn't do that. But we didn't penalize anybody because we sent them home. We kept, their normal pay and everything. So look at those policies, and you have to determine what you're going to do if when you're facing these type of flexible work schedules and PTO policies. Are there some employee assistance programs that you can implement that are going to help people through this transition? And research your Family Medical Leave Act information, or your short-term disability policies, especially when it has to do with continued pay, or if somebody has to be furloughed and start applying for unemployment benefits. So communication, that's really a huge key to everything here. And you should have a person in your business, in your facility, that is kind of the overall person in charge for communicating information. Now, you may have multiple levels of middle management and supervisors and different leaders that are specific to that department or that task, but it's important to have that communication be consistent through all levels, right? So once again, if the CEO is saying one thing, but the shift supervisor is giving conflicting information, it's very difficult for the employees to know exactly what they have to follow. And as we mentioned earlier several times, there's going to be changes associated with the workspace. So communicate what those are, communicate any other new hazards that might be in place, what other hazards have been eliminated, and then the controls you put in place in order to mitigate exposure to those habits. Supportive and encourage them to come to you. This is a time when it's really important that we listen to everybody at all levels of our company, whether it's the entry-level person that's doing a little bit more basic tasks to somebody that's highly trained doing very technical things. There's not a difference in levels of awareness, because even though some people may be more educated or highly trained in certain areas, their level of awareness and being able to identify things that apply to them is unique to all of us. So we have to listen to everybody at all levels, and then focus on those positive changes to reduce that fear and anxiety, because once again, people fear the unknown, and the way to overcome that is through education, through additional training, through additional communication, soliciting input, and making sure that they know that their concerns are real and that you are considering them. So some of the external factors that we cannot control is some of these government policies and guidelines are evolving as we speak, right? So we have some federal standards. Certainly the CDC is trying to, be nimble, and when new information is presented to them, new studies, new guidelines, they're trying to be adaptable and making sure they're communicating whatever those changes are. We've seen a lot of different recommendations on masks and face coverings. Early on, there was some conversation about how they weren't really effective, but now it's kind of involved where they want everybody to wear some sort of face covering. So these things do change. OSHA, while they don't have any direct regulations for the virus specifically, but they do have recommendations on how to address them and what type of controls you can use. And so they want everybody to have the safest and most current information. The State Department of Health Services, the governor's office, you can go on the governor's website, you can see all the previous executive orders, you can see the ADHS website on recommendations. The governor's office also has some great information specific to businesses on how they can effectively return to work and build confidence. And then you may have some local things that come into play, put at the city or the local health department level that you just need to be aware of. And from the community standpoint, not all communities are equally effective. We've seen some areas that have had some really strong outbreaks, where some of the more rural areas are not quite as difficult. And so, and there's a lot of different factors that come into play that create some of these higher risk areas versus lower risk. And those levels of exposure and risk can also change as we go through this. So once again, just be aware of your local community, what's happening there, and be adaptable as those exposure levels change. Are there going to be recommendations that change along with it? And so that we have to, as business owners, the key here is really trying to be flexible as much as we can. So reducing employee stress, and we've covered a lot of this: positive communication, additional training, additional education, planning. You got to have a plan. Failure to plan is planning to fail, is a term that I've heard. If nothing else, create a plan and create some structure. And when people see the plan, when people see structure, once again, kind of a cleaning schedule, that alone can build confidence. Hey, you know what? We're trying to do the right thing here. We do have a plan. We have action items that we do specifically, rather than just kind of listening and adapting mentally. No, here's some things we're actually doing that are very visible to our coworkers, very visible to our customers. And I mentioned earlier, lead by example is a huge, huge factor. So when we start to work on building trust with customers, and I know you had another presentation earlier in the week that focused on this, be visible with what you're doing. You know, when I walk into a restaurant or a place of business, I want to see that it is clean. And if you have a process in place that you developed, it's okay to post that in the lobby, in the waiting areas. Hey, here's what we are doing to ensure your safety. I was in the drive-through of a fast food restaurant last week, and they had a little poster right outside the handout window that says, here's the steps we are taking to protect not only our employees, but you as our customers. You know, we care about you. And something as simple as that can really create a lot more trust with customers and comfort level and confidence that you're doing the right things. And that can be done through effective signage, like I say, posting information. And if look at your facility from the customer perspective. How many of you walk through the front door, not just to come into your business because you do it every day, but stop and look, what are my customers seeing? When I stand right here, what do I see? Do I see a nice, clean, safe looking facility, or do I see some things that I'm concerned about? So evaluate, look at your facility from a different set of eyes, and that's where having other people involved can do the same thing, because you are getting this wide range of perspectives from everybody. And actions matter. Um, Maybe you have a policy where you require all of your customers wear face coverings. There are some retailers out there that you cannot enter their store without face coverings. And how you have that conversation with somebody who comes and they don't comply, those sorts of interactions not only affect that individual personally, but let's say there's other people that are observing how you're communicating with that person. It can go a long way in your reputation and how people perceive your business and how you're running it. So make sure whatever contact or interactions you have with your customers based on managing COVID-19, make sure those are done in a positive, helpful, concerning, I'm here for your safety kind of a standpoint. And you can also use social media to effectively communicate these messages. There's nothing wrong with using the social media to say, hey, you know what, we're open for business and we've cleaned our facility top to bottom and we've put these procedures in place and we have these controls that we've done. We truly care about your safety and your health, and we invite you to come take a look and see for yourself, right? So those sorts of things can be really, really helpful. So to kind of summarize, you got to have a plan. Planning is critical, and then with that plan, you're analyzing your risks, you're looking if your potential exposures, you're planning what your controls are, and you're putting those in place. And then when you have that plan complete and you're implementing those controls, communicate and provide information to your employees, to your customers, to anybody that you interact with. And they see the actions that you've put into place. So we have good plannings, great information, affirmative actions. It helps reduce stress and it helps increase confidence, and it leads to your success. So that said, let's see if we have any questions.
Ed, we have one question right now, and it's a pretty simple one. It says, can we get a copy of the release form in a Word format?
Yes, I can email that to you. I think I copied it in a PDF, but I could recreate it and email it to the ACA, and then you can distribute that or put it on your website.
Yeah, Ed, if you send that to me, I can have it posted next to the recording from this webinar on our bootcamp link, which I will post in the chat window one more time.
Okay, and just to be clear, it's the attestation form that has a series of questions on it. Is that what we're looking for?
Ray, if you're still on, if you could clarify that in the chat box. we'll look and see if Ray clarifies that.
All right. Very good. But yeah, I can certainly take that document and convert it to a Word, or would it be function? Well, as obviously as a PDF, then they can't change on their end. So a Word would be easier for them to edit according to their specific needs.
We have another question I'm going to answer real quick. It doesn't really do with safety. It says, do you offer webinars that focus primarily on HR topics? We have done some as part of the boot camp. I have to go back and look at the different recordings that we have listed on our website. All these boot camp sessions are recorded and then posted, so you can go back and review them, or if you miss a session and you want to see it, you can see the recording and the slideshows that go with it. So so it looks like all the questions for now. We're getting close to that time. You know, we appreciate Ed and all the time he spent on our Thursday safety sessions. Ed, as we wrap up and wrap up this session, and your Thursdays here with us, any last words you want to share with the attendees?
You know, if kind of summarize things, that yes, the COVID virus has changed our world. It's kind of turned things upside down, but this will pass and we will move forward and we can be successful. And the way to do that is through good planning, identifying our hazards, identifying our controls, keeping people safe. And based on that, the confidence will return, our businesses will return and be healthy again. And obviously we hope that happens sooner rather than later. But if you're adaptable and you're able to do what you have to do to control things, then you're going to be successful. So I really appreciate everybody's participation. The page showing has some different links of resources that are available to you. And feel free to reach out to me as well. My contact information is there. So if you have any questions about this or any other safety topics, we'll be happy to help.
All right. Thank you, Ed. We appreciate your time and efforts to be on here, and the great presentations you've shared with us.
Thank you.
So just a reminder, everybody, tomorrow at 9 a.m. is our marketing session. We got a great presentation plan, so register, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks. Have a great day.